Hello, everybody. Let me just make sure this is recording. Yeah, we're good. All right, cool. So now we're moving on to chapter 7. This is going to be our last week in anthropology, and thus there is a reflection due at the end of this week. Okay. So chapter 7, something down. There are no readings for this week. Again, like I said, this is pretty light when it comes to that type of stuff. I understand the reality of the situation that many of you don't like to read, so I try to keep it at a minimum. That being said, though, when I do need you to read, I really need you to read. Okay, so real quick tips. Please make sure to check commentary on reflections. I'm in the process of grading those. Sorry for the delay. Um, yeah, it's just really important because a lot of times you will get full credit, but there'll be something wrong, and then I'll tell you the thing that wrong that you got. Yeah, just make sure to check it. Okay. Specifically for reflections. Actually, quizzes or all multiple choice was not a big deal. Tips for reflections, please only use information from class. It's very obvious because when I talk about things, it'll be very clear. Okay. If you do not use information from class, it'll be subtracted points. Okay. And if it's copy and pasted from like ChatGPT, you're gonna get a 0. So please do not play that game. Make sure it's 600 words. That's pretty much it. Okay. When you're writing these reflections, a lot of it is going to come from the PowerPoint. So that's actually where you should get most of your information, and of course from the lectures, right? So just keep that in mind. Okay. So after understanding a little bit of our past, what were some key factors in humans being able to live as they do today, right? So if you compare like how we live today versus how we lived like 1,000 years ago, it's a very different type of lifestyle, and even earlier than that, right? And even if you compare us to like 50 years ago, 60 years ago, it's a big difference. So what are some of the main things that you think allow society to become like it is today, right? And I'm thinking in more general terms, right? I'm not so much thinking about oh, this is a selfie light. Hold on, let me do this real quick. Oh, is that good? Think it's good. All right, anyways. So what are some of the things that really allow us to live the way we do today, right? If you think about again how we live today versus how we lived again 1,000 years ago, our lives are completely different, right? We don't hunt, or if we do hunt, it's more of a choice. It's not involuntary. We live in sheltered spaces. A lot of our stress comes from different sources than what it did in the past, right? And there are some major things that have a big influence on our society, right? If we were in class, I would ask you obviously what you think those things are. But in this particular lecture, we're going to go over in what, well, in at least this particular class is kind of going to be the most important couple factors that help, or that is encouraging us to live as the way we do today. Okay, so basically the question is like, what are some like big things that change the way we live? Because again, we are like living very extremely differently, completely differently, almost like a different species than what we did like 1,000 years ago. Okay. All right, so some environmental background. Until about 10,000 years ago, humans and their hominid ancestors were all gatherers and hunters living in bands. And if you don't remember what bands are, make sure to go back. Bands are just like small groups of people that hunt and gather. They do not live in larger and more organized societies. Then glaciers retreated and Earth's changing climate created new ecological settings. Okay, so this is said in a very vague way because we don't necessarily know why it is that we did this. Okay, so the logical answer would be, and this is a theory. Remember, this is a theory. This is not like 100% true. The theory is when the glaciers retreated, it made it more difficult for big animals to survive and easier for smaller animals to survive. And humans, we aren't small, super small, but we aren't super big. When you have like saber-toothed tigers and like mammoths and stuff like that, those things are very big animals, right? So the reason why it was easier for smaller animals to survive, who knows, right? Freaking, only someone that could travel back in time would know. And even then, they would need to like do research over a bunch of years. But basically, you know, some people will talk about the weather, the climate had changed to make it easier. But also, more importantly, for humans, the theory is that smaller animals were able to thrive, right? So we were able to hunt more, get more, you know, resources, and you know, basically eat easier. But that is, again, a theory. And so that's why this statement is said so vaguely, right? What we do know is that 10,000 years ago, glaciers retreated and it changed the dynamic of the Earth, right? For whatever reason, climate, whatever, right? And it allowed humans to do better in survival. Okay, so that's like the truth that we know so far. Okay. So this is a very, very important part of this class. Okay, this is like one of the key things for this particular lesson. Okay, human imagination. Dependence on culture helps humans survive, but is also a source of freedom. Cultural traditions arise out of imagination and cultural experimentation with the material world. Traditions can become entrenched and affect future actions. Humans can have similar life ways in different environments or different life ways in similar environments. Okay, now this is a terrible example on the bottom. I'm actually going to change that right now. Human imagination is very, very important. Change this. What's like woodworker. Okay, so one of the important things about this is it's what human imagination is basically, right. And I know that everyone's going to associate my imagination with like, you know, thinking about things that aren't there, right? Which is very important. But I want to move away from kind of like the way we use imagination when we're talking like to young children, or we talk about, you know, creativity. We are talking about those things, but in a different way, right? So when we talk about human imagination here, we're talking about culture, right? And culture is very important. One of the most distinct things about humans is culture. And what makes it so distinct is that we are unique, right? We are unique in the sense that we will be in environments that are exactly the same, but have different ways of solving problems, um, or vice versa, right? We might have completely different environments that do the same thing. And I'll make clear what that means in archaeology. But more importantly, right, human imagination, right? Our dependence on culture, yes, it's something to help us survive, but more importantly, it's a source of freedom, meaning that it creates differences among humans all, you know, throughout the world to each other, right? You do not think exactly the same as anyone else in this world, right? You might think similarly, but you'll never think exactly the same, right? And that's very important. Okay. Cultural traditions arise out of the imagination and cultural experiments in the material world. So basically, what they're saying is that cultural traditions or culture arise out of our experiences with things day to day, right? So it's no surprise, for example, that if you are a group of people that live near water, you will, you might have a religion that includes a water god, right? It's, that's, so culture doesn't arise out of our experiences day to day. Okay. Traditions can become entrenched and affect future actions. This is very important. That just means that culture affects our behavior. Okay. Now I'm trying to break this down as easily as possible so you kind of understand why it's this important. A great example in a more modern sense. Wow, that sucks. In a more minor sense, right? When we talk about sorry, in a more modern sense, right? Let's say a very easy standard for a lot of cultures is don't have sex before you're married, right? Now, obviously, that's a very common standard, cultural standard. But how does it affect our decisions, right? What's interesting about humans is we don't necessarily follow it exactly, obviously, right? Because there's a lot of people that have sex before marriage. But what we do is it does influence our behavior. So, for example, let's say you have sex before marriage and your culture says you're not supposed to. that might affect the way, for example, you tell people, right? Or you might not tell people at all. You might try to keep it secret. You might try to do it, when no one's around. You might feel bad after you do it, whatever. The main point is that that cultural standard is affecting your behavior, right? Now, and this is very important, it affects your behavior. It doesn't tell you what to do, right? And that's what makes humans so interesting, so special, is that we might have this cultural standard all across the board, but what it does to us is different. How it affects us is different. Okay, and that goes back to humans being unique, right? And so, specifically for archaeology, why is this significant? Humans can have similar life ways in different environments or different life ways in similar environments, right? So, what that means is basically humans are so interesting because they could have the same exact freaking environmental setting, right? There could be a group of people live near the river. There could be a group that live near the river, and a mile down, there's another group who lives near a river, right? Now, even though they both are faced with the same um, environmental challenges, right? They'll develop different ways of dealing with those challenges. So, for example, that the fishermen, up the river might catch fish with like with a fishing pole, right, on a line, while the people south of the river might use a netted basket to catch fish, right? Those are two different ways of solving the same problem. Okay, that's one example. Now, in this particular example, what they're saying though is humans are very special in that their environment doesn't define what they do, right? So, for example, there are people who are woodworkers in one group of people. There could be a woodworker in another group of people, even though their area has no wood, right? Or there could be people who are good at fishing, even though they don't have any water near them. Okay, so even though they are facing different environments, they might have the same way of solving a problem, right? Which again is very special because they are not in the same environment, right? So what does that mean? That means that humans, whatever, our one thing distinctive about our humanity is that we do things very differently in the same environment, or we could do things exactly the same in different environments. Okay, like it's kind of crazy that there's freaking sushi in Phoenix, Arizona, which is landlocked, by the way. That's why I use that example, right? So there, what this example, specific for archaeology, is trying to say is that yes, while the environment does influence us, right? Because of the way humans are, what makes us special, human imagination, because of human imagination, it doesn't mean that we're gonna do things one way. Does that make sense? I mean, yeah, I'm sure many of you know, there are people from freaking, from New York or from places on the coast that don't like seafood, right? Even though they're right next to the freaking sea. Okay. So the main point about this is, again, people are unique to each other. Okay. Now, why is that unique? The reason why that's special and important is because if you look at other animals, when faced with similar challenges, they usually have exactly the same response, right? If not exact same, very similar, right? And for humans, that's not the case at all. Okay, I know you guys have ever heard that thing like, "Oh, my dad's a drunk, of course I'm a drunk," or "My dad's a drunk, of course, I never touched a thing of alcohol in my life," right? That's a kind of like a similar idea, right? Where you have a cultural standard or you have something going on, but how it affects you is going to be different for everybody, right? It could have encouraged you to drink in this case, or it could have discouraged you from drinking at all. Main point though in this case is that again, that standard, you having a drunk as a dad is still going to affect the way you behave. Okay, so now I've told you all that stuff, but there are three things I want you to pay attention to. First thing is for archaeology, the reason why this is important is because it adds to, especially when you're doing analysis of people that lived back then, just because they live near water does not mean they know how to fish. Okay, the environment does not define what those groups of people were doing. That's the first thing for this particular class. The next two things, this is probably going to be on the test, so I would pay attention to this, right? Human imagination is extremely important because that's where culture comes from. Okay, see how, arise out of imagination, culture, basically our experience with the world whatever that might be. In this case, it might be more environmental in this case, but it might not be. It could be just experience like the pressures of, whatever, your mom telling me you gotta get married, right? That's another pressure. But anyways, main point is culture arises out of human imagination. Without human imagination, culture is impossible. Okay, that's first. That's the second thing. And the last thing, which is very important, okay, is that without human imagination, we would all be doing the same thing, or we would have a pattern behavior that is super predictable, right? So that's the three things. First thing, in archaeology, just because you face the same environmental pressures does not mean you are going to have the same response to the pressure. The second thing, culture arises out of human imagination. And then the last thing, without human imagination, we would all be doing the same thing. Okay. So those three things are very important about human imagination. All right. And you'll see why this is important as we talk about domestication. So domestication is a form of niche construction that happens when an organism actively changes its environment or a new environment. So niche construction is actually a biological term. Niche construction is when an organism changes its environment, right? So easy examples would be a bird building a nest, a beaver building a dam, ant hills. You know how they have their little ant things. They're modifying their environment, right? So for humans, our niche construction is domestication. Okay. Domestication of plants and animals is a form of niche construction because reproduction of a local species is interfered with by human action. And human action changes local environmental settings. Okay. So this is kind of a tricky slide. If you don't watch this video, you're gonna get screwed. When we're talking about domestication, if you use the word tame, first of all, I'm gonna cry. But number two, that means you didn't watch this freaking video. Do not use the word tame. If I see that freaking word tame in your answer, I'm gonna lose my stuff. Just because you have tamed an animal does not mean it is domesticated. What domestication really means, at least in archaeology, is that you have control over their reproduction. Okay, so obviously easy examples: cows, chickens, pigs. We have control over the reproduction, and thus they are domesticated. Dogs, cats, same thing. We have control over the reproduction. Once a cat or a dog, we do not have control over the reproduction, meaning like feral cats or the wild dogs. I think, well, wild dogs are hard to see in America, but you go to other countries, they have wild dogs. That is not a domesticated animal. Does that make sense? Do not use the word tame, for the love of God. If you cannot control the reproduction, it is not domesticated. Okay, so the definition of domestication for this class is when the reproduction of a local species is interfered with by human action. Okay, that's obviously easy. We control the reproduction in a lot of ways, but specifically with agriculture, with farming, right? We control whether or not the chicken eggs become chicks. We control when cows get pregnant, because I don't know if you know this, but they have bulls and certain seasons that get them pregnant so that they'll have kind of babies around the same time. It's easier for the farmer. That is controlled reproduction. Okay, so good. I have that down. But remember, domestication is not just of animals; it is also of plants, right? So when we're talking about like rice, right? Rice doesn't grow naturally in these beautiful lines and patties, right? That's something that we do. We are literally controlling the reproduction by putting it in a line, by harvesting it in certain places or at certain times, whatever, right? So keep that in mind. When we have control of the reproduction of a plant or an animal, that is when it is domestication. Okay. And in plants, it's kind of obvious. Like if we have control over like when they're growing or where we put them or whatever, that's domestication. For animals, pretty obvious as well, is like when we control when they have babies, that's a clear indication that they are domesticated. Okay. So again, please do not use the word tame. All right. Great. All right. So human changes of plant domestication. Sedentism, or settling one place, or location became increasingly common for farmers. Wild plants like wheat were transformed through domestication. Okay, so this is another big one. If you Google this, right? If you Google why is domestication significant to human development, right? It's going to say it's going to have a lot of food and all this stuff. Yes, that's true in the long run. However, for this class, and maybe for the purposes of avoiding ChatGPT, what this is it helped us. It forced us to stay in one location. And the reason why I say that is because if you look at our human history, right? If I were to ask you to grow fruits or plants or farm animals, would you know how to do it right now? No, it would take you time to learn. Not only would it take you time to learn, it's easier for us because we have like YouTube and previous experience from our ancestors. We have books, we have all kinds of stuff, right? But if you were if you were trying to farm, right, and you're recently, started learning how to domesticate, do you think that all your food is going to come from the potato? Do you think you're magically going to grow like potatoes like amazingly? Of course not, right? So the reason why, oh sorry, so what I'm trying to say is sedentism is actually a more impactful part of domestication as opposed to it having a lot of food, right? So again, I'm gonna say this again in one sense so you guys understand the biggest or one of the biggest contributions, and you have to mention this in your answers in the future, one of the biggest contributions of domestication for our society is that it forced us to stay still. It forced us to be sedentary. Okay. So that's massive. That's very important. Okay. So let me tell you why that's important. If you look at our society today, most of our cultures and societies are built off of staying still. Okay. What does that mean? Let me give you a great example. When you move from city to city, is it difficult? Yeah, it's kind of difficult. Different school system, maybe slightly different tax rates, whatever, right? It's not too bad, but city to city, it is a little bit of hassle. Okay, not bad. But now let's go from state to state. Now you're starting to have some real problems. Now it just so happened that let's say you're a lawyer, you took the bar exam, you have to retake the bar exam. Let's say if you were you were let's say you're going to community college in Kingsborough and your credits might not transfer over to the system over there, right? Your taxes and everything will be completely different. You have to re-register your driver's license or your ID, right? Things are getting very different. Now, let's go from country to country. It's even more difficult. Every freaking country's system of becoming a citizen or living there is completely different, right? And then, of course, living there, it's going to be hard to navigate all the legal things, right? That's why I give immigrants a lot of credit because it's not easy, just like as you go through life, like buying freaking property, buying a car, knowing the law, all these things are very different, okay? Main point is, if you look at human history, what is the one thing consistent amongst most of our societies is that we stay still. Okay, or sorry, it's easier to stay still. Okay, so that is one of the biggest contributions of sedentism is that it forced of domestication is that it forced us to be sedentary. Okay, now and again, the reason why I don't like the food thing that they talk about usually on like Google and stuff is because, for our ancestors, do you think they knew how to freaking grow stuff immediately? No, it was a process of learning. And on top of that, it's hard enough for us to grow stuff, like just as student or as people as we are now. Imagine how it was freaking 1,000 years ago. Can you imagine how difficult that is to learn how to grow stuff without YouTube, without books and all that stuff? Okay. So it forces us to stay still. That's one of the biggest contributions to domestication to our society. So animal domestication, domesticated animals is challenging to see archaeologically, but could be indicated by this slide. Now, so what's interesting is that to understand whether a animal is domesticated, theoretically it's pretty easy. But to see this archaeologically, to see it like by digging stuff up is pretty difficult. Okay. That being said, these are the indications, right? Animals outside their natural range. Let's say chickens are from Queens. They're not. Do not quote me on that. They're not. But let's say chickens are from Queens and you find them in New Jersey. Pretty clear indication that they were domesticated and brought over. Okay. Physical changes in animal shape and size. If you compare dog bones to like a wolf bone like 1,000 years ago, or even dog bones to a dog bones like 120 years ago or 200 years ago, very different, right? And that change, if you can see that change, then obviously they are also, or it is a clear indication that they are domesticated. Okay. The challenge, okay, I'm gonna talk about challenges after this. Abrupt increase in animal numbers in one like location. So if you see like a bunch of bones in one location, pretty clear indication that they're domesticated. Increased numbers of males killed for meat. This is probably the hardest one to see. If you dig up a lot of bones and those bones are all male, like let's say chickens or whatever it is, right? Then it's probably also a clear indication that they're domesticated, right? So animals outside their natural range, the problem with this is just because you find it outside their natural range does not mean they're domesticated, right? It could mean that it just got there on accident, or it could mean that they were there, but you could only find this one set of bones. Then you think it's the only one there. Then you think they're domesticated. It's a kind of like a gamble. Physical change, animal shape and size. The problem with this one is that they need to be similar enough for you to see the difference. So let's say it went from a wolf, and you compare a wolf to a poodle. Now you might be like, oh, they're related, but you might not think that a wolf evolved into a poodle if you didn't have any of the bones in between. So that's something that's very challenging as well. Abrupt increase in animal numbers in one location. This could happen for a lot of reasons. There could have been a big forest fire, and then a bunch of buffalo were trapped in one area and they died there, right? Or whatever. And you might be like, oh, hey, they were domesticated, but in reality, they just died all at once. And finally, increased numbers of males killed for meat. The reason why this is challenging is like, when you find things in the ground, it's not like you find a whole freaking skeleton, right? You only find a couple pieces of bone. And we do not know necessarily if this freaking leg bone belongs to a male or not. And that's the challenge. Okay. All right. Why are so many people texting me? Life is so busy. There are so many freaking things going on. Anyways, animal domestication stages, okay? Animal domestication may have followed 6 stages: random hunting, controlled hunting, herd following, loose herding, close herding, and factory farming. Okay? This is the progression of all this stuff. Okay. And again, this is a theory. This is actually, this is very similar to the bands, tribes, chieftains, states. These are just categories that we put people in. They don't necessarily follow it exactly, but it's something for us to better understand what's going on and to put them into kind of like drawers, if you will. Okay. So animal domestication, let's see, random hunting, exactly what it sounds like. Hey, there's a buffalo. Kill it, eat it. Good. Controlled hunting. Okay, controlled hunting is just being a little selective, right? Let's kill the older buffalo. There's a young buffalo, but let's save that for later. Let's kill the older buffalo. The young buffalo might go, do some things later on, right? We might be able to hunt it later. Herd following. Herd following, exactly what it sounds like. You find a herd, you follow it, right? And then you kill it as you kill one animal as you need it, and then, keep going. Loose herding. So this is similar, but the difference here is that you are purposefully doing things to intervene in the reproduction just a little bit, right? So it's like, oh, this buffalo looks a little sick. Let's just kill this buffalo and then throw it to the side so it doesn't get the rest of the buffalo sick. Or, oh, look, there's this like, freaking, this tiger trying to kill all these buffalo. Let's help him kill the tiger so then we have the buffalo to eat later. Whatever. So you're kind of helping them survive, or you don't necessarily have control of their reproduction, but you're kind of helping them survive. Okay. Close herding, right? Close herding is something that kind of what you would expect out of like an organic farm. And finally, factory farming, then that's what we do today, where we raise like, millions of chickens and kill 500,000 every like 3 hours or whatever. Okay. So those are this is what we believe this is what we believe the domestication of animals follow, like this kind of schedule. All right, think about domestication. Okay, this is kind of where, well, I'll talk about it at the end of the next one. So scholars once viewed all original cases of domestication as called a one universal factor. Broad spectrum foraging is one theory that views domestication as directly related to climate change. This is the one I was talking about at the beginning of the lecture. The end of the Ice Age enabled more secure hunting, fishing, and gathering. Populations grew and became sedentary. Stress on resources led some to domesticate wild animals and plants. Okay. So what they're saying is like, because the glaciers melted, and then people, were eating more basically, right? and it became more safe to live, the populations grew, right? And as the population grew, they stayed still. And as they stayed still, they needed more food, more water, whatever, and it forced groups of people to domesticate. Okay, that's one of the theories. The second one, competition between local groups for dominance could have spurred domestication. Feasting, competitive exchange might have increased demands for food. Land use would have increased. Development of food production followed. Theory emphasizes social factors. Competitive feasting is difficult to see archaeologically. So what this theory is saying is that groups of people would flex on each other. They'd be like, yo, F your group. We're going to eat 50 fish today. What are you going to do about it? And they're like, all right, bet. I'll eat 60 fish today. And I'm like, all right, bet. I'll eat 70. And they keep on competing with each other. And eventually they're like, yo, we have no more fish. And so because of that competitiveness, they're like, shoot, we just destroyed our natural resources. We got to find ways to make more food. And that's how domestication came about. Okay. Now, so the reason why I have these two theories in here, right, and this is related specifically to human imagination, is when you hear this first one, you're like, oh, that's pretty logical. That makes sense. You know, that's what it is. And you hear the second one, this sounds ridiculous, right? It sounds like it would never happen. But both of these theories are equally possible. They are not. It is just not just because this one's logical doesn't mean that it's the one that's going to work, right? Just because this one sounds illogical doesn't mean it's one that didn't work, right? It would be logical if I stopped freaking scrolling at night to get more sleep so I would have a better day the next day. But guess what? Do I do that? No. Many of our decisions are not based off of logic. They are based off of other factors, right? There's a million other factors. Could be a bunch of things. But the main point is when we think about our ancestors, a lot of times we think of them as non-human. When I say non-human, I don't mean like animals, but what I mean is like they're too predictable. They are not that predictable, right? These are people. Like if they had a baby that grew up in our time and we had a baby grew up in their time, they would just be people living in individual time. They wouldn't be a different species, right? Remember, these are humans. So it is important to note that again, because of human imagination, right? Things that we do are not that predictable. This one, the one with the retreating glaciers, right? It seems like a logical result to stuff that's happening, but in reality, this illogical one is just as possible. We don't freaking know. Okay, so I just wanted to clear that up for you guys. These are just a couple examples of how it doesn't follow the mold. So there's an example in Southwest Asia. Recent studies of the 12,500-year-old Natufian culture use the multiple strand approach. Sedentism was possible initially without domestication. Natufians settled in the villages of 40 to 150 people. They intensely exploited wild resources in small areas and showed evidence of social stratification of forms. Okay, so basically what this is saying, right, is this group of people, the Tufians, right? They lived in a complex society, right? They stayed still. The sedentism, they stayed still. But guess what? They didn't have domestication, right? And the reason why I bring this up is, again, I want to bring this up because not every group of people is going to fit exactly into these categories. These categories are created by archaeologists to help us understand what's going on. But in reality, this is not like how all humans developed. Does that make sense? It's kind of like a general scheme. A lot of people did not develop that way, and the Natufians are a good example. Okay. Oh, this is just some fun stuff. Domestication of plants and animals occurred independently in three areas of the Americas: Mesoamerica, maize and squash; South America, manioc, potatoes, beans, quinoa, and llamas; and finally here, Eastern U.S., goosefoot, marsh elder, sunflower, and squash. The reason why it's kind of fun is because Eastern U.S., that's here, right? If you go to the what's it called, the Marine Park Preserve or whatever, like it's like that I think it's called the Marine Park Preserve, but it's like not the park part, the naturey part. You actually could see these plants over there, and they're naturally they're what's it called? Their origin is here in New York. Okay. All right. So consequences of domestication, sedentism. So everyone looks at domestication as this like amazing thing, you know, like whatever, but it's a little more complex than that. There were pluses and minuses, okay? Domestication and sedentism had drawbacks, but society became too dependent to return to foraging. Key point there. Domestication, right? as we talked about earlier, human imagination is very powerful. Okay, it is what makes humans humans in a lot of ways, right? So domestication, okay, is a result. So basically, what I'm trying to say with this statement here is that we did not pick domestication because it's the most efficient thing. There are many things in our lives that are efficient that we don't choose, even though it's a logical choice. Okay, and I gotta freaking silence my phone. There's like 1,000 people texting me right now. Anyways, so what I'm trying to say with domestication is that we were too reliant to return to foraging. It's not that it was so efficient that we didn't go forage anymore. Let me ask you a question. When you started living in this society and in life, were you like, you know what? I don't like to hunt. I'm gonna go, buy food from Seatown. No, you didn't have a choice. There wasn't a choice to hunt. Okay. So is it that we are choosing to domesticate? Not really. It's that we have become so dependent, we have become reliant on domestication, which is not a bad thing, by the way, but we've become reliant on domestication, and so we cannot return to foraging. And you might be saying, oh, Professor Fong, what a stupid nuance, who cares? The reason why it's important is because, again, you need to understand as humans, what makes us so special is that we do not follow the logical process, or we do not follow a pattern of behavior, right? We have a million different ways of responding to the environment, right? And that's the main point I want to put across, because when we talk about domestication specifically, right? Why are we domesticated? A lot of people, the general answer say, oh, it's more efficient, you produce more food, blah, blah, blah. No, it's not why. The reason why I haven't returned back to foraging is I don't freaking know how to forage, right? It's the same thing. Okay. Now, obviously, for the people, people like thousands of years ago that were starting to domesticate, do they have a better understanding of foraging and domesticating? Do they know do both? Yes. Their choice is probably like, oh, domestication is better or whatever. But for us, for everyone after that, they were born into domestication. And so it's more of a cultural phenomenon than it is a phenomenon of being like, oh, hey, this is better or worse. Does that make sense? And again, I remind you, we as people have a lot of smart choices to make every day, but we do not always make the smart choice, right? Because if we all followed the smart choice, we would all be doing the same things. And that is the main point I'm trying to make. Okay. So keep that in mind. That's very important for human imagination. Land was no longer freely available because of domestication, obviously because you're staying still. Populations grew, more food. Diseases were more readily spread because you're staying still. Surplus production of food became possible, meaning more food than necessary was actually a possibility now. And finally, social stratification and social complexity increased. Social stratification, again, is the different categories of people in your society that have different access to resources, and social complexity increase. Okay, so again, a lot of good things, a lot of bad things. I shouldn't say good or bad. They are just things. Some of them end up being good for us, some of them end up being bad for us. We just deal with them differently. Now, this third point right here, diseases were more readily spread. That's very interesting, because if you think about COVID, for example, first of all, COVID wouldn't have existed if we were running around and not sedentary. But number two, literally COVID only exists because we are sedentary, because we live the way we live. Like if we did not go to work in buildings or whatever, COVID wouldn't can't even like spread, right? Another interesting thing is like, pests, like New York's favorite animal, cockroaches, rats, all those things, would they exist if we did not domesticate? I don't think so, right? Or like bed bugs, especially, like those things without beds, would bed bugs even exist? I don't think so. Okay. Very good. All right, so full circle. What are some key factors that humans be able to live as they do today? The first thing is human imagination. Okay. The reason why human imagination is so important is because it is the process, or sorry, one, human imagination implies that people all think differently. Okay. And for archaeology in particular, it means that humans deal with the same problems differently, or different problems the same. The main point is you cannot predict exactly how they're going to react to the problem or to the pressure or whatever. That's first thing. Number two, cultural traditions or culture in general arises out of human imagination. without human imagination, there is no culture. And 3, oh, if there was no human imagination, we would all be making the same choices, right? We wouldn't be exactly the same, but we would all be making the same choices because, again, we are not using different methods to solve different problems. We're using the same methods all the time. Okay. Now, that's the first thing, human imagination. And the second thing, big thing, is domestication. Domestication, the control of reproduction, the control of the reproduction of plants or animals. That is a big factor in how we're living today. Yes, it helped feed us, but more importantly, it helped us stay still, right? If you look at our societies today, almost all of our societies reflect that. Staying still is easier than traveling back and forth to other places. Okay? All right, so again, just some tips on the reflection. Please only use information from class. Make sure it's 600 words. If you have any questions, please shoot me an email at raymond.fong@kbcc.cuny.edu. Other than that, I'll see you at the next lecture.